Hey, real quick before we get into this one, this is kind of like a part 2 of the team talk that we recorded earlier this week with Yonas and with Russell. Between recording that and releasing it, the restriction list news hit, and then I guess hit a second time that it would be for the next month format that we have for our finals in September. So because of that, I wanted to just make another video going over just our thoughts going into this kind of mini meta that we have. Obviously, results may vary. These are just a lot of new decks and new ideas that we're re-exploring with the context of the new restriction list. So some of these decks might be bad, but I think just going over what our thoughts are going into testing and finding out the meta and what it looks like without the red purple law. So the other thing is that both Russell and Yonas were not available at the same time. So what I did was I did one kind of session with Russell and one with Yonas, with my own kind of in the middle. So we all brought 3 different decks and we just kind of talked about it. And then for my section, I got Russell's opinion, and then I switched over to a future recording I did with Yonas and his opinion on the decks and stuff. So a good amount of content. Obviously, this has quite a bit of runtime as well. And if you guys want any of the deck lists for these, they're all on the website, Egman Events, which is linked. This has actually been around for a while, this page. It's just kind of our team deck list, but it hasn't been really, I'd say, well advertised. But I'm going to do my best to keep these updated as much as I can for it. And you can find this in a couple of locations. The first is if you hit this OP07 here at the top here on the deck builder. That's what this leads to there. And then also for the tournament results, I put it at the top here. So the staff team deck list, you can click here and it just leads to this page. So the bold ones are the new ones that we're working on. These will probably change. And there are a couple that might change between recording and releasing it. So just make sure to check out the page and kind of go from there. But this is a lot of fun. I hope you guys are enjoying theory crafting and deck building for this new format that we have exclusive to us. And I hope you guys enjoy the video. All right, we're going to start with Russell here. Russell has 3 different decks. One that I don't know if well, I've been watching your Twitter. It's been super funny. Like 24 hours a year, like Bonney is not the answer. I've thrown it away. The deck is dead right now, and you're like, oh, wait a minute.
Yep. And then as soon as they go, like, all right, well, actually, you guys get the balance before nationals, and that's enough for me to be like, you got it, Bonney. You're back in play.
Yeah, you're like, this is potentially the best deck in this format now.
yeah.
So
it really just depends on how everyone feels about black, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I mean, we're just gonna dive into that soon.
Yeah. But honestly, I don't have a lot of preface. We have 3 decks for you. Spoilers: they are Bonney, Boa, and Hannyabal. So, but we'll start with, I'd say, the more likely, and then go towards the fringe options for you. But why is removing 2 cards from this meta suddenly made Bonney a really covetable choice for next month?
I think hitting Law made this deck's, in my opinion, more unfavorable matchup in the meta, which was Law. Manageable, like, to play this deck again. I previously, if you didn't draw a Hody Jones, you were losing. If you drew 1 Hody Jones, it was 50-50. If you drew 2 Hody Jones, it was like 70-30. You had a big advantage in the matchup. If you didn't see any, it felt really terrible. I talked about this in the last video, that I wanted to give up on this deck because I was tired of feeling like I had no agency or no place in the game at any point when I lost to Lucci or to Law. So Lucci losing stage and Law getting outright banned made it much more realistic to play this deck now going into nationals. With that in mind, we're going to run with the concept that because there's no more Law, we don't need as many Hody, and that's why I dropped that down to 2, and it could potentially be 3 again. And
real quick, are you not afraid of Nami? Maybe before we get into this too much, what is your expectation for what this meta is going to look like? Yeah, because I think both of us are in the same way, where we generally don't like the deck that is the meta, but more of the one that is able to answer our compete in the meta, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so I think the meta is going to be Black Yellow Luffy, Morias, a few Lucci players, Namis, and then Bonnies and Rogue stuff.
Okay.
Rogue stuff being Reiju, and I think after people have enough time testing out blue, realizing they don't like it because it doesn't fit their play style or they don't like the way it draws, then they'll revert back and covet to black and or yellow. And that's why I'm trying to tailor my list accordingly. The only thing I would want to change is that you might run into more mirror matches with Bonney, and with that in mind, you need to have a Hody Jones. You need to draw a Hody Jones in the mirror, and that's the only reason I can see myself like bumping this count up to 3 or 4 again. With that said, I wanted to go um, a a route that lets me play into blue more because I have tested quite a few games against Boa and Dofi as my previous Bonney list, and 8-drop Rosinante felt really good into them, as well as playing for the 5-drop Bonney on the turn that they need to either play a Boa or a Gravity Blade on you. And so having the ability to go like Rosinante into a Bonney and cut off their 10-drop Kaido play when they go to 10 is very strong. Mainly for the Kaido that bounces instead of the Kaido that draws. You really don't care if they draw cards; they're gonna be drawing cards all game.
Yeah, sure.
And and with that in mind, I also wanted to re-include the Baby 5 engine, so that way I could play ways to find the Rosies that I'm adding into the list. And more top end means this deck is much better into Enel than it was previously. I mean, you can bump up the Zoro account again. It's the same issue Bonnie's always had. It's what top end do you feel like playing into what meta? And I don't think that many players have experienced the Bonnie mirror. Even at a few of my regionals, I've played the mirror, and my opponents are like, "Oh, this is my first time ever playing this. I'm pretty sure you're gonna beat me." And I won by like having plus 12, like plus 10 card advantage.
Yeah, sure,
because they just don't understand what to do in the matchup. And with that in mind, I was like, all right, I can kind of go light on Hody Jones and kind of just play however I'd like to. And maybe that's why I don't mind keeping Zoro at 2 as opposed to bumping up to 3, especially if I don't anticipate as many yellow decks in the future. Because maybe all the puddings will scare people off of Enel as well, where the concept of pudding getting reintroduced into the meta will scare people off of Enel, meaning you'll need less Zoro and such. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'd still, I think 2 Hody's a little bit low for me, but I'm also a bad Bonney player, so I have no credibility for that. But
if anything, it's changed one 10-drop Dofi into a Hody.
Sure.
And then now we're at 3. No, we're at 3/3 again. And it's like pretty solid. I guess I'm just super happy about the fact that there's no more RP law.
Sure.
And stage is gone, so the whole they have stage in play, and now they can freely just use Brook to remove your Basil Hawkins is no longer there, and they also have a much harder time dealing with our top end cards outside of just like Ice Age it, because Ice Age being a -1 really hurts their card advantage, and then the removal plus the number of cards they'll have going late, because once you enter that standstill of like, I just know you're gonna Moria every turn. If you don't have a Moria, you have an underwhelming play, and now I'm going to toggle between playing a second Basil, then using my Dawn to pressure the card advantage, like the card attrition that we have between each other, or I'm going to drop a 10-drop Dofi into play. And I think the fact that stage is no longer in the game makes that that attrition even more favored for Bonney.
Yeah,
and that's probably why I dropped down the Rosinante count from 4 to 3, the 2-drop, and yeah, I think 3 should be fine given the current circumstances. And I also dropped out the 3-drop Bardo because with no more law, it kind of lost its immediate value that it needed to have in the meta, and yeah, it's no longer needed.
Yeah, I get that, because the cover for that was that it's a 4K, so they'd still have to invest some resources to get rid of it. I do think I think we kind of touched on this. Basil used to be like just a wall in this, right? It used to be a card that was really tricky. Like as you mentioned, like sometimes like a Brook with with the stage could get rid of it. I mean, you can technically, I guess, still like Ice Age and Brook, but but the other thing is that if you leave a Dawn open, then you can just rest their Brook beforehand. So, but I would somewhat expect, if Rob Lucci still sees a fair amount of play, which I think it will, finger guns will be more staple heavy. So that could be a little bit for it, but as mentioned, like I think my first time I started testing Bonney like months ago, the first couple of matches I played against Boa, and I'm like, man, either this deck sucks or that matchup is awful, and
it hard counters.
Yeah, it is a hard counter where I think again Boa and Dofi I think have a little bit more space, because the fundamentals of those decks are playing these 4-drops, and then if you're able to just keep pressuring with them after you use your removal spells and stuff, you can get there. So with Red Purple Law not doing the same thing but better, and then the stage making it harder for Lucci to get favorable trades in that kind of way. I think that's what you're mentioning, that Bo is probably more present now.
Yeah, which is exactly why I'm including a BOA list on the
Yes.
3 that we have here too. Yeah,
definitely.
Because it's like, all right, if something scares me off of this deck per this meta outside of Finger Pistol Gun, what is it going to be? And that's going to be like the blue decks that we're going to jump into.
Definitely. We have 1.5. We have Boa and Hannibal. But are there anything else you kind of want to mention about this deck? I'll say it in the intro. These are obviously like day one, like not cemented deck lists. Don't buy these exact 50 and expect them to be good and be like, I watched the video and it sucks. Like, yeah, anyone who's gonna peddle anything with value is it's going to be hard to guess for next. It's probably the most volatile this card game has been in a hot minute on just what the meta looks like, what's it going to be. And I also think that there's going to be a lot of people who are going to be trying to hide their spice, which I understand because of how big the events are next month, but has generally not been a thing in this card game either, which is interesting.
No. It's pretty much all been out there, and then if you have a rogue idea, no one really believes you.
Yes.
until you show up and play Red Luffy in a set 3 tournament, or something like that. They'll be like, "Oh wow, you were serious." And I was like, "Yeah, I'm not." I think it's better than Zoro. I'm sorry.
Yeah, but I've been enjoying the challenge for that, and I think a lot of others are, even though again it can be a little obnoxious not knowing what you're playing at times. So. Well, cool. Well, there's Bonney. As mentioned, I think it's going to be more present, and that does terrify me. So we do have Boa as well. So obviously, Boa and Dofi are usually conflated together. Very similar. I think Boa is more controlly. Dofi is a little bit more aggressive, right? What makes Boa more valuable for you compared to Dofi, and why this list?
I think Boa dumpsters Bonney.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that everyone's considering blue for playing Pudding makes Boa be in a better spot than Dofi in terms of like overall card value.
Mm-hmm.
And how do I say this? The +1 you get off of playing removal spell for Boa in the 6 to 10 dawn turns feels really strong as opposed to what you get out of Dofi's late game.
Mm-hmm.
And with that in my mind, they all play the same exact cards and the same pool of cards minus if Dofi you have to play Verona, and then in Boa you can play whatever you'd like. And I think since Nami's also being talked about, I wanted to play Gion no matter what in any blue list, and so you'll see that going forward. Like if I'm playing Dofi, I'm playing Gion. If I'm playing Boa, I'm playing Gion. I will include this just so I can have a shot or a really good shot into Nami players that I'll run into at Nationals. Other than that, I think I've seen most Boa players like day one play this deck really badly, where they don't understand you have to drop underneath 5 almost every single turn.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to counter out lots of hits. You're going to have a very long game. You should see 10 down twice if the game's close. And if not, then you're probably landsliding them and you just see 10 down once.
Mm-hmm.
You're kind of just running away with the concept that you getting 1-for-1 value into a board is fantastic for you, and you're trying to take advantage of the fact that stage was banned.
Yeah.
And so this deck had a really hard matchup in Aluchi previously, and it got much better because stage is gone. As now, Black will have they'll struggle to find ways to put 2 of your characters in 4-drop Lucci range without completely spending all their resources. And if they do that, then you do what the deck does best, which is just force favorable 1-for-1, and then your leader ability turns into a +1 play against them until you run to the late game. I'm still undecided whether or not 10-drop Kaido should be the one that bounces an 8 and a 4 or 8 and a 3 as opposed to draw 4. And I think 10-drop Kaido, the draw one, is worse. And I included it because I'm just not super positive on my thinking. And this is just a safe inclusion. But I wouldn't play more than 4 of either Kaido. If that makes sense.
Would you ever?
Because I've seen.
Would you ever do a 2-2 split kind of thing or full
Oh,
set?
absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just the way I build decks. So I have random 1 and 2. I was for no reason.
Yeah.
That this would absolutely be one of the cases where I'll be like, oh, a 2-2 split. If I see one, I see it. If I don't, no biggie. And then the draw one feels really bad with the leader ability, but maybe if you're countering out so much that you want to like, you don't have a strong play next turn outside of I can counter all these hits now, stay at 3 health or 4 health, and then drop in a Kaido, and then draw back up, and then have a productive, like a second time 10 Dawn turn. I can see that coming up quite a few times, but more than likely this will change into a 2/2 of bow splits.
Yeah.
I also wanted I wanted Gum Gum Rains, so if my hand's clogged up with events and I have to take a 7k hit, I don't have to just lose the game and never get my leader ability back online.
Yeah.
So I do like the inclusion of the 0 cost event. Other than that, it's a standard Warlord package, and I think that this Warlord package is something I've been wanting to play for quite a long time. And then you also play Pudding, so it's definitely going to be good into the meta, and what everyone's expecting to be the meta. And then you get to have Gravity Blade into like Reiju and all these other decks that are getting tons of hype around it.
Yeah.
So even though HG, I totally get that, but like Gravity Blading in general is just really strong, especially in the Bonney. That's like pretty much the reason you beat that deck. Is if they have a 5 cost and a Basil or anything in play, you just Gravity Blade it. The only card you cannot clear is Hody Jones, but you just string double Boa on the Hody Jones.
Yeah.
And you kind of clear out like all the pressure put on you. Boa herself being an 8K is phenomenal for this deck, and it's really necessary for board presence going into late game. And I think, more and more reps of this deck. This deck's fairly straightforward to pilot, but it's just kind of counter out early. And then know when you want to drop Boa as opposed to playing like your removal spell for the turn. So like, most black decks just go, oh, there's a character, I'm going to pop it, and if it lives, I'm going to be scared. This is that kind of time where it's like, oh, that can stay there, I really don't care. I'm going to Boa, put this down, and then next turn I'm going to go like Red Rock into my Jinbei play or Weevil play, and then have a productive turn from there.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think the only thing I would say from this is, I don't know. It just seems good. The only issue I have with Boa always is just like making sure you're at 5 below for the card draw, and you're kind of a little bit dependent on your like sequencing for that. But I do like it. Like the idea of this deck always seems really, really solid. And we kind of skipped by this, but yeah, I think like the 10 cost. There's a decision because the other one works with leader effect a lot better, and I think it'll just kind of depend on how prevalent 8 costs are. Right? Because I mean, bouncing back Moria feels kind of bad, but you'll still do it sometimes. And
well, like if you have board and their Moria doesn't completely clear out all your bodies, so like if you have 3 bodies on board, they play Moria and only clears 1. If you 10 drop and bounce that Moria back, they're in a world of hurt because that's like 3 to 4 swings coming at them, and they just have to burn another 8 Dawn. To then replay another mediocre turn because they had previously a mediocre turn, right? So that just means you just dump your hand to counter out and save your board.
Yeah.
So I think most of the time people don't play green enough, and green is really the decks that make you understand whether or not you value your exhausted, like your tapped characters on board. And now that the meta is going to be less black, that decision making tree is going to come back into the meta a little bit. Especially with blue, because when I swing 7 at your 5, you're like, all right, well, I'm not going to give up 2 cards for this. And sometimes it is a better play just to have that aggressive body on board. And now that people will have to learn a new color, because I think that's definitely going to happen. I personally I've never played purple in a tournament before, and I'm sitting here reading purple cards and trying to understand how they interact, and I can't imagine what it's going to take for me to start understanding when to save them and when not to, depending on the board state. So. Yeah, it's gonna be a fun month.
Yeah,
this is gonna be. I'm so excited. I'm so excited.
I think again, most people are very excited about it. They're like, man, this like, and it's wild with just again, it's only 2 cards, right? One's a leader, right? So it's a very heavy card, right? But all of this is in general, it's people are excited to test or play the game. Like, not that this was a bad meta and people were already playing it already, but to just jam resources and try some new stuff. I think it's been I saw the news like right before I was going to bed last night. Awful.
Yeah.
I was just laying in my bed staring at the ceiling like, what about this? Is this
how do you think I came to like? I was already building Hannibal for 07 with Law, and then I'm like, all right, no Law Hannibal. What does this look like?
Exactly. I think the only other card I would consider. Also, can this search it? Yeah, it's anything. Like maybe nine drop Mihawk, because it works with leader effect. I know it's like only good on curve, and I
Mm-hmm.
think, I mean, it not hitting Moria is like the biggest issue with it. But
Yeah, you got to red rock that turn,
yeah, yeah,
and then play your 3-drop Dofi, or like play a Sengoku, search something,
hmm
and then use your 2 Dawn
yeah,
for pressure. Yeah.
yeah. I will say, okay, last thing too, and this is completely off topic.
Yeah.
I've this card existing. I'm like, all right, can I play blue black promo Sakazuki? It finds Moria. It finds seven
Yeah.
warlords. And
Yeah.
we were already playing Navy package. People want to play this card to hard counter Nami as is as well. So like,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh man, can we? Is the meme finally a real thing? So I think that's been exciting because yeah, when people are high valuing blue in these first couple weeks, and it's gonna be funny this time next week when people are like, nah, blue's still
Yeah.
bad or whatever. If
Yeah.
that's the case, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Blue Black Sakazuki, the new promo, is definitely in my testing circle
yes,
of like a lot of stuff. As soon as I made that tweet, I was like, I know what's gonna happen is people are gonna start asking about leaders that are still in my brain, but I just didn't put on this list.
yeah,
And the list is already like 12 leaders.
Yeah.
'Cause I was like, guys, like obviously I'm over here playing Hannibal. I'm gonna test everything. I don't
Mhm.
care. Like it's gonna take my time at some capacity.
Yeah,
So.
I asked you, hey, can you have like, and I felt bad because I felt it was asking like 3 to 5 liters, and you're like, I have 12, so I'm like,
Yeah.
it's from the other side, so
I was like, I'm good on ideas. I just don't know what is valuable enough for the viewers.
Sure.
Where they won't be like, this is blatantly troll, and I'm like, all right, sure, I guess.
and then I guess Hannibal made the cut somehow, so we can skip right to him. But
Yeah.
one, I just picked up the old art for this a couple weeks ago, so I hope you're right, so I can get that.
Was that like $3?
Yeah, like $3. He's like $3.
All right, nice.
But
It's value.
yeah, I've wanted this deck to be good. Obviously, like the Inazuma is insanely good. Draw
Yup.
2 at end of turn, amazing.
And counter power.
and counter power and searchable.
Yeah.
But yeah, this says at the end of your turn, you can turn one of your cost 2 or greater impel down characters to your hand to set up to one of your Dawn cards from your Dawn deck if it's active. And man, I still every time I look at this deck, the only thing is like Bon Clay 4-drop is not an impel down for some reason. I don't get it. I don't understand. It would be so helpful for this deck, and they're like, no, it would break the game if he was
Yeah. They actually wouldn't want that interaction to happen.
No,
like the ramp into bounce back ramp, and then they're like, all right, stop this.
All right,
So,
all right. But yeah. So the idea with this is that we have like these 2-drops. We have Domino, which is able to do it. Sadie is super good. All of a sudden, it used to be like you kind of have to go like -1 to just like ramp 1. But now you get to say, all right, cool. I play this a turn early to play out one of my Jailer Beast, and then I get it back to hand, and it's still a 2K. So that's actually super good in a lot of ways. And it's so maybe you should explain your deck though, perhaps.
Okay, so running with the concept that banning the stage and banning law kind of presents like two gaps in the meta that have now opened up, or 2 new windows of taking advantage has opened up, which is 4 health leaders can get back in the game because Red Law was blatantly the most aggressive and wide deck that also cleared, and it gate kept a lot of ideas, this included. And I was trying to think of decks that can spam just as quickly while still providing some sort of answer to Black Yellow Luffy, Bonney, or Black in general as a color, and obviously Nami, right?
Sure.
So we have Pudding and Gion once again because we're allowed to play blue. This is going to feel like it's a purple Luffy deck that is for some reason playing impel down cards, and with that in mind, can now proc Hannibal's effect at the cost of 1 health, right?
Yeah.
So the goal of the deck is to just put 2 characters on board by spamming via Little Sadie, then ramping up. In the black matchups, you drop in Magellan, and then in other matchups, you use the aggression you got off of having 2 cards on board to find yourself a pudding turn. And if they choose to counter out your mini swings instead, then you can opt just not playing the pudding. And then we have another turn, since we bounced back our Little Sadie, to then play in Little Sadie again to generate another body, and then bounce it back again with Hannibal's ability. And then then goes all the way till our 7 drop. So we can Ivankov and play an Inazuma and then spam the board with 2 bodies that way, or we can keep curving out into late game. And honestly, this late game is, I just pick these cards because I know I want to play them.
Mm-hmm.
The counts and the complete counts of this list are all over the place. I haven't even touched this deck yet. It's just what's in my mind and what I'm going to start testing. And I'm pretty sure Douglas Bullet just beats Black Yellow Luffy.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, assuming you're at 10 Dawn, it says, I am going to be swinging for 18. Can you counter out?
Yeah, and it can, and tap both Sabos.
Yes, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Not knowing if that needs to be the only top end card, I was like, fine, I'll include 2 9-drop Kaidos, just so I can bring it up the fact that, yes, this is the best late game that Purple has currently, and we still need to play it. I'm also running with the concept that 2 of the Chihuahuas that have Rush can be played, and then I can get immediate value off of my double body board. I know that some player, I believe it was 06, was doing decently well with Hannibal on a stream.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure that stream was like West Coast, if not Peoria. I just remember sitting at home and watching it and hearing about Hannibal being played.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't find their list or anything regarding where that VOD was at.
I think I was there, so we can talk off it. But yeah, I remember seeing Hannibal, and I think the only thing is that you probably need 4 Inazuma, because Emporio unfortunately is color locked to only playing blue Impel Down.
Yes.
So the only target you have right now is Inazuma. So that likely needs to go to 4. I mean, you're missing nothing because it's a 1K.
Or we can just drop the Ivankov count down.
Sure.
Because it might be too much top end already.
Yeah, I mean, you could probably run like 2 of it and then like some Inazuma. Even like 5/7 Crocs though, those are fire. Fire off like 2 7Ks off of 7 Dawn is pretty nice. So.
Or we can Luffy. Is Luffy bouncing double attacking not too relevant?
It hits 4 costs, right? So the only issue is that like this is a deck that discarding 2 is a lot more expensive than it is in the vanilla Ivankov. But I'll also mention that I think there's a chance that actual Ivankov might be looked at again too, which is really exciting. So
absolutely, yeah.
But
I mean, it's all just same concept, right?
Yeah.
It's like, all right, blue's back. How can we best utilize blue? And then these random decks that have not been explored at all, at least on our side of the regions, can now get like a proper thorough testing.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think the only other thing I would say is that I made this joke earlier too, is that like now that blue has bottom decking back after red purple stole it from its color identity. It's clear that bottom decking cards is really strong in this meta, and now that the easy way to do it is gone, is the standard way of doing it still going to be very, very powerful, and I expect it to be, but that's still what we're going to be determining. So anything about,
and then with that in mind, I didn't want to include it in this list because I honestly wasn't sure if you needed to take the time to do that, because we are ramping, and then we de-ramp our opponent with Magellan, but we are ramping up to go higher. I was like, isn't just putting extra bodies and turning them sideways so much better than playing the Gravity Blade to like potentially bot deck 2 when it's more than likely only bot decking 1 because we're so wide already. So
yeah, I get that, and like Kaido gets some removal still, right? But that's just always been my issue with Red Rock and Gravity Blade, is like it's a good card if you already have cards on board, right? If you're trying to use it to reclaim board, it neutralizes it. It doesn't, and that's why Gecko Moria 8-drop is so good. At its peak, you play 3 bodies and remove 1, sometimes 2 bodies of your opponents, right? And that's why it's able to swing. If it was just 8 costs, remove 2 bodies from your opponent's board, right? Like then that again is even. So so then your opponent has priority again to play another big threat. And then you have to either answer it again or it's a round. So, but that's why like we'll talk about for Dofi, but like same thing. Like if you're able to Jinbei Weevil on 2 Dawn or 4 Dawn, and then like even like Red Rock whatever they play next turn, or like set up a Gravity Tiger later, I think it's going to be harder for other decks to be able to establish a body and remove a body outside of 8-drop Moria, because that's what Red Purple Law would do. That's what Sage would enable to do fairly easy for Lucci as well, and that concept is going to be harder to do, I think, systematically.
Yep. Since Ice Age is naturally a -1.
Yeah,
So
yeah, like
instead of getting +1 doll game
yeah,
off of the body on board, it's now like, all right, we can go even. Yeah.
Yeah, you go even, and it's sometimes just a dead card, right? And because it's has no counter, so it seems more balanced from because it's just always, as I said way earlier, like I'm going to play my body that removes your body, and then continue to just do that until I win. So
Yep.
But 8-drop Moria, which somehow dodged everything, is definitely gonna do that. But at least it's more of an investment, and you have to have a setup for it, which
they don't like getting boss monsters.
they do not.
I think that's their thing. They're like, we won't, because what's gonna have? And it's like, well, you guys have 4 or 5 different really strong 8-drops. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
So
We so I don't think I mean I brought this deck which has Moria, right? But I think a lot of people said, man, if you ban Moria, Black is no longer in this game, and then which might be true, but like that kind of uncovers a little bit more of another issue of then that means that Black isn't good. It means the card is good, and it's just carrying it, right? I don't think that in itself is healthy. It's most of the Black decks are what's the best way to abuse this card and take advantage of it. So well, we're through your decks. We're gonna go through the 3 that I have prepared. Also, I mentioned this in the intro. Yonas is on a different timetable, so I'm going to have him later go over his, but I'm going to go through all these. I'm going to ask Russell his opinion. I'm going to switch to the Yonas interview, so it's going to go back and forth for it a lot, but we'll keep this there. We'll keep Russ's beautiful face on the screen, so you'll know if he's ignoring me or he's just in thought. So, so first deck though, Black Yo Luffy. I obviously play a lot of this deck, and I would say that into this meta, I am moderately scared to play it, mostly because based on my own testing and my own experience, it's very dependent on making sure you can counter what your opponent can do. Set up these scenarios where your opponent has literally no outs to what you can do, and with potentially green and blue on the rise, as you mentioned, like Bonney and Boa, those are typically bad matchups for this deck. Pudding being able to reset our hand is bad. Gravity Blade bottom decking our Sabos is bad. Bonney being able to rest her stuff and then play out like a big Zoro. All of that is bad, and is very tough for this deck to deal with traditionally, at least how I built it previously. And the reason I had to build it previously was to keep Law in check, which was more popular, and I think was the matchup where you had to, if you ran too many bricks, the deck would just go off too quickly and go with it. So I hate this deck list. I do not like it. Like you, and it's kind of like the same thing. Like 24 hours later, if you showed me this deck list 2 days ago, I would be like, this is awful. I would never run this in my life. It seems bad, and I'll probably change this before testing it fully. But my new idea is that one, Nami is a rough matchup, but 3 aces helps get the job done. If you want to balance up to 4, it's good. This obviously is like the best card for starting up your plays because it gets you down to lower life and it's an 8k pressure continually, so that's really, really good for you. Ivankov, I still have 2 copies in it, but it's probably one of the weaker cards. It was really good against red purple, but and setting up our life and going down to 0 life, sometimes we need that, so and like value Moria plays. But there's that. Then there's this monstrosity, which I'm very, very upset that it's in the list, but if we are in a meta where they are not hitting you or taking it slower, which with red purple Law out, there's a potential for it. You need answers for some of the big bodies. So Kuzan can do that for you. I don't know if it's good or not. Some people swore by this card weeks ago. So, but that's what we're in here for. Again, this could easily come out. I really want to take it out, but I'm not taking it out yet. Same with this guy. I think this was a decision point. It's, I think, more popular than not in most decks, but it just wasn't doing what I want to do. But with the mindset that playing a 4 cost on curve has a higher percentage chance of sticking on the board now, I think this is really good for those scenarios. So being able to play this, and then if you can protect it with Sabo, it just means like if your opponent is removing it, they're usually going 1 for 1 for you, and Kuzan draws a card, so you're fine. So I'm doing that, but like obviously we have like more bricks for this as well. So cards I took out were Ice Age, Thunderbolt, and 6-drop Newgate. Newgate already like people said the card was weird, so but it was mostly for red purple law, which doesn't exist, so that's easy. Thunderbolt was really for getting rid of 5-drop uses kids, and so but if we can be a little bit more greedy with the cost reduction, there's that. And then Ice Age, that one can definitely sneak back in, but I wanted to talk about some newer additions potentially instead of just keeping it around. So
Yeah.
and
that Kuzan count's too low.
it probably is, but
Four
like
Kuzan.
yeah.
4 drop. Card's broken.
I mean, I could go like 3 and 1.
Yeah.
I'll put my swag. Back
We don't need to bonk up anymore. That's an anti-red purple law
Yeah,
card.
but-
That leader's banned.
Oh boy, oh boy. But then I have like less self awakening, whatever. I'll keep it there. I'll just.
You don't need. All right, you don't need that. You're playing 10 drop Kuzan.
That's true. Yeah, I just
But
never
the
go down to 0
point-
life.
yeah.
You're right. You're right.
The point is just allow them. They're like, yo, you want to take the game slow? I'll take the game slow with you. And then you drop in a 10 drop Kuzan and they lose the game.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the mindset.
Yeah. So I'll see if that mindset continues for the next couple weeks. But I think a lot of people immediately have the reaction like, oh, Black Yellow Luffy, it's already doing good. It lost a middling matchup, I would say. I'd say it was like 45-55. Winnable for sure, but not in your favor. You mostly had to go second and hope that they didn't get 2 5-drop kids. But now I think Nami is in the same spot as a matchup wise. It should be more present. And as mentioned, Boa and Bonney are pretty menacing for the deck in general too. So I think this is less good today than it was a couple days ago.
Yes, because of the lack of Lucci and the incoming hard counters.
Yeah. Lucci was our best matchup because they just can't remove anything, and you're like, wee.
Yep.
And like sometimes they play Isho and it feels bad, but by and large it was one of our better matchups, and it was really present. And I still think a lot of people are going to be on Lucci. Not gonna lie, it still might be the most played leader in Cardfest. Because people are just so used to the deck, and maybe Moria will take a bite.
Yeah, I was gonna say over Moria. I think they just switch over to Moria.
Yeah, I could see that 100%. So, but
Yeah.
generally, which is still a good matchup for us, right? Especially because people are starting to play 6-cost Brooks and the Rob Lucci, and I don't think you can do that in Moria as easily because you don't get the reduction on the leader. So, but that's the current list for right now. So
I like it.
Cool. We'll go over to Yonas real quick in the future and see if he's had any extra thoughts on this list. All right, Yonas, here is the first deck that I have for us. It's Black Yellow Luffy, which I felt kind of obligated to make a video or, go over this deck list in general. This build, I mentioned it with Russell too. If you showed me this deck list a week ago, I would have been like, this is trash. I don't like what it does. I don't like the ratios for it. But this is more in a response or my instinct that, Red Purple Law was a kind of tough matchup for the deck. So that's kind of why I ran a little bit more removal for the 5 cost. And like the Newgate I felt was good for that matchup too. With that being gone, and I went more with the Kuzans, which I know have been more popular in general, and even the 10 drop. I think if people just kind of starve you out, then and there's a lack of a true quote unquote aggro deck in the format, at least at the strength that Red Purple Law was, you can get to 10 Dawn and moderately confidently be able to play this to help remove, because against Bonney, with the idea that Bonney and maybe like Bo or Dofi might be a little bit more present, Kuzan is a moderately good card for that, and the 4 cost too. So but what are your thoughts about Black Yellow Luffy in general?
So I do think Black Yellow Luffy is going to be the boogeyman of the format, and I do think it kind of needs to adapt its playstyle a lot because the fact that Bonney doesn't really have a natural enemy in RP Law anymore, and the blue decks like Boa and Dofi can kind of play a little bit more freely now that RP Law and Lucci kind of got some nerfs respectively. So I do think it needs to be a little more reactive dealing with opponents' threats. I do think you kind of need to lean towards more Kuzans. I'm just not a huge fan of the 10 cost just because of the scenarios that come up where you play it and you're at 2 life and you're a 5k leader and you have to give up 5 cards to defend yourself. I'm always just never a huge fan of those spots, but I would be really interested in completely going towards the 4 cost Kuzan and then go alongside a couple Ice Ages, and then maybe the yellow Sabo from starter deck 13. That's probably what I would lead, and just be a little bit more like, I'm going to deal with your first really large body a lot of the time, and against green, that's very, very necessary to deal with like 8-cost kids, 9-cost Zoros, and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's generally where my head's at, and it's just a weird case of just like there are. I always felt like my build for Black Yellow Luffy was so reactive to what the meta is. You're so dependent on like knowing because you have. I mean, you kind of cheese it out, right? You're like, at the end of every one of my turns, I have to create a board state where it is systematically impossible for my opponent to win, right? And if you make that incorrect judgment, you lose on the spot, right? So in a format where I think 5-cost Sabo has more answers, and on the other side, Bonney is feeling a little bit more confident. I think that there's going to be some major changes for what the deck looks like to answer that, because I think Red Purple Law, you want to go evenish on that matchup, and it also Red Purple Law also kept some of your least favorite matchups at bay as well, so which was nice. So
weirdly one of your best friends in this meta.
It was
very close.
Yeah, the fourth brother. So, but yeah, I think the only other thing is I bumped up aces to 3 and 3. I think that's a little bit more necessary. If you don't like Nami, being able to get that off early and just get a 5-7 incredibly early into the game to get some pressure and value, I think is worth it. So, honestly, like either Luffy has to be like 100% more aggressive or 100% more defensive if it wants to be successful, and I'm not sure where the success is really going to be. But I do think, though, if people just are playing the same decks that were existing at the beginning of the meta, an OP07 into this new one, they will likely not see the same success as they were seeing.
It's going to be a rude awakening. RP Law, even though they didn't have much success in the English region, I think it had a huge effect in terms of deck building.
Yeah.
And I think now that constraint no longer exists, there's a lot more cards you can play to kind of play a lot more defensive of a game. I've seen cards like Isho in lists like this.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen a bunch of other stuff like that kind of give you a lot more flexibility in terms of playing against like these controlling decks, and also kind of having niche effects against like decks like Nami, of course. So
yeah,
the world is our oyster right now.
I really want to make I've made it before, and maybe I'll dust it off like a Navy build, because we have like brand new who can find Garp. All right, stick with me.
Don't tempt me.
And we can get Kuzans, 4-drop Borsos. We can add some Ice Ages. So and it fills your trash. So if you need your 2-drop boys or 5-drops in there, it gets you that bonus. So
jeez.
So if you want like a value Moria playing a brand new, broken. So
alrighty.
I think there's some builds that exist too, but this is, I don't know. I think Black Yellow Luffy is good by default, but it's going to have to make some changes in either play style or deck list that maybe some people don't realize on frame one.
Yep.
So cool. All right, so that's Black Yellow Luffy, and let's move on to our next deck with Russell. All right, the next deck I have is Dofi, and this is a super vanilla version of it. I won't even deny, but if you want a list of what it looks like so you can start doing your own stuff, go for it. I don't have the Geons on it. You know what? I'll put those in right now. What's their worst? I guess we can take out 2 Mihawks, 4-drops, right? We could put 2 Geons.
Yeah, it's either that or the is it Crocodile? It's either I like the Law though, because the Law is good into the Tanami again as well.
Yeah, because
the
bottom deck of cards, which is really funny. So
yeah,
but generally, I mean, we are more aggressive, right? We can like Gravity Blade to bottom deck their Kayas or something funny like that, so there's more cards in their deck. But when we are able to, I mean, in the longest way, like if we are able to just like hit Jinbei off the first trigger off our leader effect, we generally also just are in such a good spot in the matchup, because Nami's generally, I mean, White Smoke still helps the deck out, don't get me wrong, but the fact that we're able to just be aggressive, if they have 2 made cards in their hand, we can putting them back so they have to reset and be at a lower hand count and higher deck count. The deck is just straightforward. This again is not super special in any way. There's probably techier or better versions in general, but if you want a first build of this deck, I think this is a solid start for it in a lot of ways.
I agree. They're all pretty cookie cutter.
Yeah. Yeah, and mostly because you are forced to run a lot of the Seven Warlord stuff, and that takes up a lot of your space in the first place. So you don't have as much room for neat things like you would with once again Boa, where you can run like a little bit of it, but you almost always have something with the Jinbei, and you're fine in that way. So, but to a point where you run Sengoku because you can also bottom deck it later to get the extra draw. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't really have any crucial things. I think a lot of people have already explained this deck, but anything else from you, Russell?
I think this deck goes from 2 to 3 try hard, die hard Dovi fans.
Yeah.
To taking up a significant portion of the meta. Because people that played the set 1 are like, I can't wait to go back, and then now they get to feel the power of Jinbei, because Jinbei honestly puts the stack on the map like by itself. And then the complementing is you get to play Pudding that beats a lot of decks that just sit around and compile a huge hand, and they can't do that anymore.
Yeah, 100%. And I know people are, I mean, obviously the new stuff in this set helped it out. It got the Weevil from the expansion booster. We have the reboot starter deck in a couple months during OP08 as well. So a lot of people have been looking into this leader. So I think it makes sense why people are talking about it again. It's made some minor tops in the last couple weeks in store championships and some European events. So I think it's also worth, it's already has some eyes on it. So
yeah,
I'm sure these people are just like definitely excited to lose. I haven't played enough, but I would think that Red Purple Law was one of its worst matchups based on my experience.
It was pretty 50-50.
Okay.
It depended around Jinbei plus Gravity Blade. Like, did you hit Jinbei? Did they go Omega Y? Did they Sashi Penguin early to where you know it took too long for you to get a Gravity Blade down before they were pressing your life to death?
Yeah.
Small things like that. But yeah, that law's gone. I mean, again, it was just a big gatekeeper for so many different ideas. And a big gatekeeper for decks that we're trying to slow down the pace of the game. And if they're trying to slow down the pace of the game, they usually compile a bigger hand. Thus, blue gets back because now Pudding gets to be there to answer all these decks that want to just sit around.
Yeah, and stuff like Rablucci, without stage, it's going to be very costly for them to remove a Jinbei Weevil play, which is nice. If you play that on 4 and then they just I guess like 5 or something, and then they answer with a Sabo, then you can just like Gravity Blade it if you want to, especially if they played something minor. So you get a lot of form momentum with the deck, and it just means like Moria is less good too.
If that's how that game turns out, where you get 4 and then they Sabo and you then you Gravity Blade, we're done here.
Yeah,
yeah. It's definitely a go next. So.
Or just like even Red Rock does the same thing. Like you just
yeah.
So I think I think the deck's in a good spot, and with Lucci being able to not consistently remove stuff, it makes a big difference. So
yeah, and I actually we haven't brought this up a lot too. These decks are really good into Enel.
Yes.
Because of Pudding. And Enel doesn't want to sit around. They want to compile a huge hand.
Yeah.
And then take their life early to go down to 1 to put their leader ability online. So the fact that like blue's more prevalent in the meta means that like Enel's less and less likely to see play. And it's just really cool to see the impact the 2-card ban list had in our current meta.
Yeah. I'm ready for it to be like all that changes is the Red Purple Law pie slice goes away, and then everything just kind of like equally fills out the space. But I've just been super happy with it. So, well, real quick, let's jump over to Jonas's future interview and see if he's got any other thoughts about Dofi in this format. All right, and then here's Yonas with my Dofi build. I told Russell this is painfully generic of a build, right? Really cookie cutter. But I think that's honestly for people who haven't played this deck in the format or want to find it out. I think this is a pretty good start. The only card that we really added between I think beginning of the meta and now is just a Gion for potentially the Nami matchup. It's a good 2K that just happens to be there. But maybe instead of just talking about Dofi in general, we can maybe talk about blue in general. I talked with Russell a lot about, he brought a Boa deck for one of his, because he thinks it has a lot more controlling aspects that are really nice. And I played Dofi, which is, again, a little bit more aggressive. But in his mind, a core of being able to have a combination of Raging Tiger, Pudding, and Gion answers a lot of potential decks in the format. And he thinks that could be a cornerstone for a lot of potentially good blue decks that might be popping up.
Yep, and I would agree. I think Gravity Blade Raging Tiger, even though RP Law doesn't exist as it was before, is like one of your best cards against Black Hero Luffy. Just like dealing with the 2/5 costs is still going to be a very relevant aspect of this format. Alongside against Bonney dealing with like Basils, dealing with like Cavendishes early, can just be super beneficial from this deck's perspective. So, despite the fact that this card got a little bit worse due to the metagame change, this card is still extremely potent in a variety of matchups, and um, I think that card's still going to be very, very gross in a lot of these games. And now that slower deck exists, having the access to putting to beat decks like Enel, to be useful against Nami if you kind of take a more defensive route as well, gives this deck a lot of flexibility and gives you a lot of tools to search for with its like Peronas and your Doflamingos and stuff like that. You do need to see the right half of your deck at the right time, it feels like a little bit with this deck. And a lot of like your early aggressive starts kind of predominantly on 4-cost Jinbei. But this deck does have a lot of power, is a very consistent deck with card advantage, early aggression, and doing all those other things. But it's more so just like, oh, this deck it's almost like the Moria black, not even just aside from the fact that, or blue rather, not just aside the fact they have similar leader abilities. It's just like a generic blue deck with some slight tribal overlap.
Yeah, yeah, and I was talking to Russell as well, where blue has, I think, arguably the best removal in the game, but the issue with it is that it's so costly that if you don't already kind of have board, it's hard to capitalize, right? So, for example, I could spend my entire 7 Dawn turn playing Gravity Blade, removing 2 things, but if I don't already have things established on board, it doesn't really do anything. It just says, all right, cool, well, you can play your 9 drop now, or whatever, right? So, I think that's always been a little bit of the issue. If your opponent still has things to play, then you really only delayed a turn kind of thing if you don't have ways to capitalize on it. But that's why I like Dofi, because Dofi can get some, as you said, really aggressive starts. I would say that both Law and Lucci were better at establishing a body and while removing a body at the same time, which is why that got a lot of tempo. Obviously, Gecko still exists, which is still able to do that. Just that less consistency a little bit for what you're able to do with it. But yeah, I think that's something that with red purple not being able to do that. I think I said this with Russell too, where I'm like, all right, now that blue is the best bottom decking color once again, now that it's stolen it back from red purple Law. There are some ways for this deck, and I think the color in general to be more explored.
Yep, I would 100% agree. I also really like the draw 4 Kaido, but I'm not entirely sure if it's better than just the bounce Kaido in a deck like this. If you're trying to be aggressive leaning, the card to draw 4 is like relatively convenient. But the bounce Kaido, especially against decks like Bonney to bounce like Kid, or even against like Black Yellow Luffy, just like bouncing a couple relevant, annoying characters, can just buy you a lot of time while also continuing that aggressive slant a little bit more. So I'm not entirely sure which Kaido is going to be better in a deck like this. But I would probably start with the other Kaido rather than this one, the SR Kaido.
Nice. Yeah, Russell and I talked about it. I think 100% for Boa. Yeah. I think the other one makes sense because you can get some potential card draw for it. And which, being able to do like both is really nice. I think 8 drops are usually where it's at. The only reason I think this Kaido is better is against something like Enel, where you really can't bounce anything back of value, and getting 4 cards, and also like Enel can't really get rid of a 12k outside of like spending their entire turn for like a Raigo, which is
that's true,
still impactful. But yeah, I think that's fair. I think there's people will debate on which Kaido is better, I think, till the end of time in most situations, but that's definitely a card for discussion that we've had as well.
Yeah.
So cool. Any other thoughts? The 3 decks that you're bringing don't have any blue, but any other thoughts about blue in this format, or do you think it has a potential to be more active in the meta, or the change wasn't big enough for it to really try to claw into it again?
I'm a bit worried with the aggressive or even like the mid-range decks like Dofi or Boa when you're playing blue, just because I think Lucci still might exist and probably will exist as a relatively good way to like kind of clear boards even without Ennis Lobby. Ice Age is still a very potent card. And this deck still kind of struggles with decks just like KO your threat every turn. You kind of mentioned before that like this deck either has to spend an entire turn getting rid of your opponent's characters or playing its own. And if your opponent's just always getting rid of your stuff, you're going to be a little bit too defensive and reactive against decks like Lucci. But I think against other decks, I think it has a lot of promise, and a lot of these boss monsters and answers line up pretty well into the format.
Yeah, I still think the being able to Jinbei Weevil and on curve, for example, or even let's see at 3 Dawn, like 4 Dawn, there's no way Lucci can answer it, even if they played like in its lobby beforehand. So hopefully that just being able to establish 2 bodies early game potentially with Jinbei and being able to keep that on the board for the rest of the turn and for the next little bit, I think is impactful. But yeah, I think Lucci still has removal. It's just gonna cost a lot more, I think is the way to think about it. So
I would agree.
Cool.
Yep.
All right. Well, this is our thoughts on Dofi. Let's go back to Russell on my last deck. All right, and last one is Reiju, and at least looking over like card prices, this is probably the one that people are excited about the most. Obviously, Red Purple Law was clearly its worst matchup because it was all about being at less Dawn. Red Purple Law was just better at it, and to the point where they just unironically played Reiju and were able to just use it as a 4-cost draw 2 so many times. So because of that, I think that the idea that this is also a blue deck, right? We can play Pudding, we can play Gravity Blades, which people are expecting to be strong in this format as well, is just very good. So Reiju got like a couple of tops in the last couple months. It's weird for North America because we didn't really have a lot of larger events until literally this month. But the deck is already kind of topping, and so the idea of it's losing its worst matchup, and then Law would be able to enter an EG on average better than most other decks on the early stages. So or not Law, Lucci Law would as well, but because of that,
both.
Yeah, both. Yeah,
they're bannable leaders. Yeah, we got it.
Yes, yeah, they're strong leaders. So because of that, there is that. What I've noticed though from testing is that the consistency is from this deck is not to a place where I personally like it, and it can definitely be the build, or it can just definitely be the deck still as it is. But you will definitely have games that I feel like you brick harder with this deck than you would like Red Purple Law at times. And it's difficult to find your outs or what you kind of value for it. But I mean, obviously, if you Porsche each G 2 times starting at 3 Dawn, you're gonna win a game. That's not a question, right? Most decks kind of can crumble to that. But the real skill for this is gonna be where you will find like these middling hands, or you have to play like the odds game, or find out when. Which card you prioritize, or when you Dawn minus. Personally, I think that Judge is super good right now. The fact that it's gets a lot of value in a lot of spots. I think the Niji is able to get that. This also is really good against unironically Bonney, because you can just tap their Dawn that they left up every turn, so they'd have to leave 2 up instead of 1. And so that's really helpful. Obviously 8-drop Kid is an issue. But if that ends up being a case more times than not, we have options like Red Rock that we could put in the deck that we could answer it with. I've seen like double Ichi, as much as that is an 8 energy sink with a lot of energy, being able to like double 2k minus it, and that can be helpful. So I don't think this is the deck if Reiju is going to be good. It won't likely be this 50, but blue has enough pieces, and I think the deck has a lot of momentum already that if someone finds like the good mix for what this weird little meta is going to be, they're going to find a lot of success with it.
Yeah. As a Bonney player, I did not respect this deck whatsoever, and I just didn't care to read the cards. They were doing effects, and I just be like, oh, is that what that does? That's neat. And then I just put an 8-drop Kid in play, and they lose the game.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'll read cards now.
Okay, all right. Hey, that's
and like a little bit like Porsche and then Pudding and all that. I played against one at Gen Con, and he's like, "Oh, I hit the combo," and he Porsche, and I was like, "Sweet, I have an 8-drop Kid in my hand. This game's over."
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think now that Law's gone, and this deck finally gets to like have some legs and find its place in the meta, it's really really cool. And it's just Pudding once again carrying his deck on its back. I I'm surprised you think the deck's inconsistent when it has so many consistency cards, and that's coming as someone who hasn't played this deck before.
I will
So
say,
crazy.
I did a lot of testing today, like literally at the
Yeah.
day of this, and there are a lot of games where I'm like, how have I been through 25 cards and I've not found the single 7-drop, right? Or like one or the other, right? It's the fact that, and like you compare it to like Black Yellow Luffy, right? Black Yellow Luffy, you also have to find your 2 pieces and you have to rotate them. Black Yellow Luffy has Sabo. Sabo is very, very good for consistency.
Cycling.
It's so much better. And I think something that also affects this one, this build in particular, is Porsche is a good card for ramping it, or cheating stuff out, right? But it looks for a completely different type, the Foxy Pirates. And the amount of times where I search, I find 5 of my Vince Smoke cards, and one of them was one I needed, and it's now at the bottom of my deck, sucks because like I felt like I had to play this card, but then I was punished for doing it anyways. So I can see, because we're also not as dependent on going lower dawn for something like Red Purple Law or something like that, we could be just abandoning the package. I think Chopper unironically deserves to be in the deck, no matter what. It's a blocker that's cost, like it doesn't matter, since like the removal that exists right now doesn't care that he's a 0 power. The fact that he gets a dawn back,
it's all about calls.
and this deck desperately need blockers, right? The Yonji 4-drop is just awful in general. So and sometimes like you want to really play the 8-drop Judge next turn, and you're at like 5 dawn. So or like you're at 6 dawn, but you're like, I want to play Ichi, but then I go to 5 dawn and then I can't 8-drop. You could play Ichi for 4 and then Chopper for 2 and then still be able to play Judge next turn. So I think there's some room for some creative plays. I wouldn't be surprised if some builds without Porsche end up making it through. There've already been like builds where people play it without even this package, just with the idea that Reiju is just really generic. The idea of like anytime you lose Dawn, you get a card draw. So like just being a generic blue purple leader could be really good if those are coveted. So obviously you're already looking at it from this side of blue purple. So I think this is I think like Animal Kingdom people have tested that out too, and it really just depends on for blue and purple in general. All its removal is really, really good, but it depends on you having the board first. And
to support it.
Right? To be able to say my entire turn is simply removing your board, and since I already had board already, I get to double up on the advantage on that, right? Meanwhile, with Black and with Rob Lucci and Red Purple Law, again, they've been really good at saying I answer your board and create my own at the same time, and
so broken.
It's very, very good. So with that, with Red Purple not being able to do that at all, and hopefully Black having a harder time with it, and Moria I think can still do it in some regard, but only on weenies, or they have to go like really minus and hand advantage. They it has a chance for your cards to hit them, especially again a 7-cost 7K is very sustainable on board in a lot of matchups.
Yes. I was gonna say it's very mediocre, and then the way it comes out makes it so non-mediocre.
Right.
Whatsoever. This effect is insane. Then I'm happy that they didn't hit Reiju. Like they didn't ban her, because I know when we were talking about previous ban lists, we're going through all this, I was like, please just make Reiju playable. Like I don't even know what this deck does, nor do I respect it. And that was at that time. Now I'll be I'll be all cards. I was like, but I don't think you should like make this card not unplayable again. That's rough. Don't ban this card. It's not its fault. It's not Reiju leader's fault that Law's running wild. Just hit Law and hit other cards. So I like that the deck's still around, and
I will say, I think we're in the when Sakazuki got banned, we are in this scramble of, all right, what's the next best deck to abuse 8-drop Moria, right?
Yes.
Right? Which was Rob Lucci, which is very easy because he was new and he had this Pantheon combo, right?
Very, When they revealed Rob Lucci as a leader, I looked at all my friends. I was like, "Everyone, get your CP9 cards right now." They're like, "Oh, isn't that good?" I was like, "It's a ghetto grade eruption for a leader. That's broken. Like we're good to go." They showed us that ghetto eruption is bannable. So let's do this. Keep it going.
Yeah, and now I think people are going to be thinking the same thing on a smaller scale. But like, what's the best deck to abuse a 4-drop 5K that draws you 2? And I think obviously Reiju is a front runner for that, but I know there's some other purple decks that now that, especially since Red Purple Law isn't around, and you can consistently know that most matchups outside of like maybe a mirror match, you will be able to draw 2 every time you play this. It's going to be very good. So honestly,
it's
yeah, go for it.
It's also just so fun because this card that everyone wants to play to net card advantage and gain like free draw is also counterproductive into playing into pudding.
Yes.
Like if you have too big of a hand, right? Like you're R at 5 and you go to 7, then you pass it to your opponent and you're like, all right, pudding out the gate.
Yeah.
And then they put pressure on you. It's really cool that there's feels like it's not just counterplay, but in the different leaders and the different colors that the now pool of OP07 gives us, we can finally revisit these ideas that we haven't had before. I don't know. Yeah. I think we're just sitting around talking about how great it all is.
Yeah.
Like
I will end it with before we pass it to Yonas. My favorite way to use Reiju is in Red Purple Luffy, because you can 10 drop, reset your turn, and then on the next turn you'll have 4 Dawn open. So you will have the turn back, and you'll likely be, I mean, unless your opponent has 3 Dawn somehow, you'll have 4 Dawn, you'll be able to play it and do your stuff. So that was my...
I'm really scared I'm gonna like Red Purple Luffy when I build it. It's on my list.
It is.
So I'm just like, man, there's so many ideas that I gotta run with.
Yeah, because people are already talking about it with the new Roger card that's way in the future in OP09 to be able to take advantage of it. And I think traditionally, unreleased Red Purple Law had a really bad matchup into 6K leaders, and then it never lost its Dawn advantage, and then it was really, really good at presenting like 7 6Ks, right? So because of that, I think people are talking about, oh, is Whitebeard good again? Is that good again? And maybe
that answer's no for Whitebeard.
No, okay. That's
you imagine all this happens. I'm like, here you go, pudding. This game.
Oh yeah, never mind. Yeah, never mind. You're right. Pudding. Yeah, never mind. Whitebeard.
Yeah. What are you doing? Like,
you're right.
Got my game, dog.
I was on a roll. So, but yeah.
Oh, can you G on it too? Let me look. When your opponent activates an event, they must place one card with their Hannyabal. Oh, come on now. Like, poor Whitebeard.
Yeah, because they'd have to. I mean, I guess so, right? Like, you'd still be able to.
They have the what's it called?
Yeah, Rad Beam and stuff.
Oh, they have the Rad Beam. Yeah, I'd be like, that's another card.
Gion is once per turn though, so we at least have that for us.
That's fair.
But well, cool. Well, that's it for Russell as well. We're gonna send to Yonas if he's got any extra thoughts for Reiju. But Russell, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I'm sure between this being recorded and releasing, you'll have like 7 different deck lists, and these will be invalidated in some sense, but. But I'll make sure to update our meta page as best as I can and keep it relevant for you guys to check it out. So
I feel like us vomiting the explanations behind the cards is already enough for people to be like, oh, okay, I see what they're going for here.
Yeah,
and then you keep running with it. Yeah.
Hopefully, I don't know. Well, sometimes people see an image with no context and they just roll with it. So
I get that too.
So well, thank you very much, Russell. Really do appreciate it. We're gonna jump over to Yonas, and we'll see you over there. All right, and the last deck that I brought is Reiju, and I think this is probably the one that is the most talked about. Honestly, the deck builds for these I think are still really basic. Most people are playing the Foxy Pirates. There was a good amount of time between me talking to Russell and now where I've kind of changed my opinion like a little bit. But I'm curious to hear yours first, since again this is a pretty high topic deck right now.
I do think this deck might be a tad overhyped, to be completely honest. There are a lot of really powerful interactions between like Porsche and Ichiji. Obviously, Judge bringing back a ton of characters can always be very, very explosive. But I do think this deck kind of has a natural problem against Black Yellow Luffy. I think like the existence of Pudding, while it is give you like an axis that helps a ton, isn't going to be like sufficient to kind of solve that matchup to be relatively close. And even as it is right now, I think against a lot of controlling decks, like a Nell, for example, I think you have also a similar level of issue, just because the amount of tax you can create in a turn aren't that like significant, and your Dawn ends up being pretty constrained. But obviously, like against black decks, Ichiji is going to be very, very potent, and now that stage no longer exists. And against decks like green, you're going to be able to build a relatively large board. And they probably can't deal with all of your relatively scary stuff. But in my head, I think that Judge might be a more relevant card in this deck moving forward than Portia will, just because I think you might have to be a little bit more defensive leaning and a little bit more grindy when you're building your Reiju decks.
All right, so to confirm this, we did not talk about this at all. That was almost exactly my conclusion, though, of at least in my mind, of like, you know what, Judge can get a lot of value right now. Porsche I found was like neat to be like early aggressive, but it was really swingy, especially since it kind of diluted some of your consistency other places in the deck too. Yeah, and since we're not as like focused on like the red purple matchup where we have to like Dawn minus the first time to be able to get in range for our effects, I completely understand like maybe us seeing some decks without this card to see if it's successful. Because yeah, Judge gets a lot of value I think right now. In the case where a lot of decks can't answer everything. I still like Chopper. I think Chopper is like an almost mainstay for this deck.
Yeah.
I think that what I said with Russell was like for 6 Dawn, you kind of have this weird spot where you're like, well, I want to be able to play an Ichi or something, but then I go to 5 Dawn and I can't play Judge the next turn, right? So for 4 Dawn, I could play Ichi, and then for the last 2, I play Chopper. I get the Dawn back. The deck's always kind of had a lack of blockers, which feels kind of bad. So Chopper being able to be a blocker, but also being able to get our Dawn back is really nice. The 0 power doesn't matter as much since Red Purple Law's gone. So unless like Zoro with Nico Robin's really popular, it's still just as good of a blocker. Bon Clay can definitely be in this deck potentially too. It needs a new home now, so and if you're playing Porch, you can play Bon Clay off Porch, which is kind of neat, I guess.
That's a fun interaction.
But yeah, in general, I think this is like what people were the same kind of thing where like, oh well, this is the deck that could survive in the format at the beginning, and I think mostly because it could play into Red Purple Law and have a chance to win because he had so much Dawn minusing, but. If we're going a little bit more tower heavy, I definitely thought like, what if we just like purely decide that Judge is the play? We want to try to get to 8 Dawn more consistently and get there. How good does the deck become? And I think it can be potentially really good.
I would agree,
especially since you can use stuff like the -1 to tap Dawn for Bonney that they're keeping up, which is really nice. You can also and if we're talking about, I mean, this deck is blue and purple. If we're talking about like building a board first, being able to play a Judge, and then if we are able to we go Judge, let's say we're at 8 Dawn, let's say we lose 3 Dawn, 1 for it, 1 for maybe each one of these, and maybe you don't play one of them. You could like Gravity Blade the turn afterwards and you have a really wide board still, which is really nice. So I think that could be contention if you want to be greedier on like your removal and your top end, and then just kind of push it out.
Yep. How have you liked Niji in this current format? Do you think it's still going to be a very solid performer? Do you think it's kind of just like a kind of filler, decent Vinsmoke card? I think the card might be like relatively underrated in this format now that RP Law is gone, but I just kind of hear your thoughts on him.
Yeah, I think it's pretty good. I mean, even if you just play it out, if you think in this deck it's a 5/6 that draws you 1, just proccing your leader effect, that's good enough as is. Especially with Red Purple Law not having stage, it might be tricky for them to get rid of it. Stuff like Luffy only gets rid of 4 costs, so like they have to invest some extra value for it. So even if it's just playing a quote unquote vanilla 5/6 body, I think that's moderately okay in this format. And the bonus of getting like some early tempo back is really nice too. So you can bounce a Rob Lucci back to your opponent's hand, which in Sakazuki that would have been like a no, but because they can just put into trash really easy. But it's a little bit rougher when in Rob Lucci, because I mean I guess they can hard play the card for 4, but they likely only like that card in their trash or on their board. They don't like it in their hand as much. So I think that's something that could be. I think there's some impactful 4 drops that you can mess with, and it helps a lot.
Yep, I would agree. Okay, yeah. I just wanted to talk about a few interesting cards in the deck, and I kind of want to explore this deck a lot more. But I do think it kind of a recap. I do think it has a few matchup issues, but either like playing the deck a little bit differently, or just like playing a few extra tech cards for those scary matchups might be sufficient.
Yeah. But it kind of is mentioned. I have this. This could be bad, and it likely is. There could be just like a deck where you just kind of like ramp to judge, and then you just do all the minuses from there, and then you just kind of recover from it. So, I don't know. There's a lot of potential for I think this deck. I do agree. At the end of the day, it's probably a little bit overhyped, and it might not be as strong or consistent as people are maybe thinking it was. Just with the idea that Red Purple Law not being in the format, but I think there's a lot of room for more creative builds instead of just again like a more standard one that we see that I've presented myself. So,
yep,
cool. All right, well, that is the end of my decks, and we can go to your decks. Let's do a little clip, but we'll head over to your 3. All right, we have Yonas with us with his 3 decks, and again, if you're watching this from like the start to end all at once, it's going to be like a little bit weird because we did have Yonas chime in for the 3 decks that I brought, but since Yonas and Russell weren't available at the same time, I did want to be able to get his opinion on it. But we're in the Yonas section all the way for this one, and we did bring 3 decks for him. We have the Purple Luffy, the Katakuri, and the Gecko Moria. But before we jumped into that, I kind of wanted to go over what Yonas and your thoughts are for what the meta is going to look like on the surface, what decks you think are going to get better, and what the meta is going to look like of what you're playing into, what you're playing around, and this kind of that idea.
Yep. So I'm first of all, I'm glad to see that the ban list is being affected in the U.S. so soon. It's sooner than I thought it would be, which is I think most huge people burden in 100%.
Itself, yes. I also, as the residential Red Purple Law player on the team, I think you verbatim quoted me. If I can quote you, you're like, "Oh, I think there's going to be a lot more Red Purple at Nats this September," and unfortunately, you were wrong on that one. There's infinitely less Red Purple Laws, but continue.
Oh yeah. I think there's like 3 main winners in this current meta now that the RP Law has been basically banned and Lucci's been like significantly weakened. I think Black Yellow Luffy gets a fair amount better. Just having one like RP Law matchup kind of gone, and then that helps a fair amount. But also Bonney gets a fair amount better. Like RP Law being gone is like a huge boon for that deck. Mm-hmm. And a lot more Black Yellow Luffy's kind of also makes Bonney a lot better. And I think Nami has its one natural predator kind of off the face of the map in that weird way. That deck used to only have one terrifying matchup. The most recent winner of Pasadena, Adam, kind of dodged RP Law the entire weekend and was able to...
Legitimately, he played it not once, over, 15 games? 15 matches?
Yeah, 15 games.
Yeah,
15
so,
matches,
when you don't see it, it's the deck's cracked.
Yeah. So the fact that he's guaranteed to never see it in his subsequent tournaments is also going to be super useful.
Yeah.
But it is going to be like those are the 3 winners, and I think a lot of those decks stay largely unchanged. I mean, like Black Yellow Luffy kind of changes a few cards. Bonney might play a couple extra cards to beat Black Yellow Luffy. Nami's probably the exact same 50. But I do think a lot more decks kind of get to exist in this meta now that those cards are gone, or not a lot of RP Laws gone, and Lucci's been a lot weakened. And I kind of wanted to explore a little bit of those kind of preparing for Nats. And I think the 3 decks I brought probably aren't going to be tier 1, but I think they're fun to explore, and they're interesting thought experiments on what you expect the current meta to look like and what pros and cons these decks might be able to have.
Yeah, and I think a lot of deck building can shift now that at least the formerly most aggressive deck has left the game, right? Yep. That means that either another aggressive deck can exist a little bit more clearly, or a lot of tools that you had to set aside in your deck building for specifically Red Purple Law to make the matchup, winnable in some sense, you can just clean out of your deck, right? Yep. So you can be like either a little bit greedier into the late game and or shift those tech spots to specifically Blue Nami now. But in general, I think a lot of people are at least expecting that Nami is a deck that you have to respect, because if you get too value or greedy, you just lose irregardless.
100%. And I think a lot of what I want to be doing deck building wise is try to like be pretty comfortable against those decks, and then try to have reasonable plans against the decks that kind of have worse matchups naturally.
Yeah.
So let's just jump right into the first
let's
deck.
go for Purple Luffy. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, so in my head, I think Purple Luffy was obscenely heinous against Law.
Mm-hmm.
All of his characters being 6K bodies for the most part kind of made that matchup really, really bad.
Mm-hmm.
And Stage kind of naturally weeded out a lot of 4 costs in this current meta because of like combinations with Brook, and like it makes it really easy for any KO on these 4 cost bodies. So Purple Luffy definitely gains a lot more benefits now that those 2 decks got significantly weakened. Black Yellow Luffy will still be a little bit of an issue, obviously, just because being a large leader can always be an issue for this deck when it kind of really thrives on creating a lot of 6 and 5K swings. But the deck still has a lot of angles of attack in that matchup to kind of help. Aside from having plenty of blockers, both Magellan to kind of mess around with Black Yellow Luffy's Dawn and 4-cost Law can both either attack their Dawn or attack their cards in ways that can be really frustrating to deal with. And I really like that aspect, and that might be something that's a little bit worth more exploring. Additionally, one tech card that I've really liked in this deck for a while is Douglas Bullet.
And real quick,
this card,
you and Russell haven't talked, right, this week at all?
I have not.
He also swears by this card, which is, I think, really funny for that. But continue on this guy.
Yeah, I do think that Kaido is generally a more powerful card, to be completely honest. But the fact that it just mainly exists to KO 6Ks and the Rush for Adi super nice is going to be kind of situationally just mediocre against Black Yellow Luffy. And also against Bonney. Not being able to deal with Basil Hawkins can be pretty annoying.
Yeah.
But both Douglas Bullet kind of like both preserving your Dawn when you just play it on curve, but also kind of getting rid of those pesky like 5-cost Sabos or 6-cost Basils on critical turns, while also trying to apply a ton of pressure can be super duper powerful in this current format.
Yeah.
And the fact that we're a lot slower means we kind of have the time to deploy him.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think he's a little bit easier to stay on board, as mentioned. Sometimes like you can just be like, well, can you get out of the 16K? And if not, you lose the game. Even if you're a 9K leader, right? That's like 4 or 5 2Ks that you have to invest in. I think it's just 4, but yeah, it's terrifying against specifically Sabo, and I think you mentioned it too. Basil Hawkins is great to get out of. So this deck was definitely a natural enemy. Or it was, yeah, it felt really bad to play against Red Purple because, you know, Red Purple is really good against 4-life leaders, and this is, you know, systematically like a 3-life leader or a vanilla leader. You either never feel comfortable to use the effect in ramp, or you do it too often and you just lose very quickly. So,
yep. And also this deck against decks like Bonney still has like the Purple Law and the Magellan to still also mess around with their stuff. And against decks like Nami, both the Discard Law, mainly just the Discard Law by itself can just be like a backbreaking enough card. Just like messing up with the cards in their hand can be super powerful. Ultimately, I think this deck definitely has a decent spread. It's not explicitly spectacular into anything in particular, but the fact that this deck is just always a very proactive deck and is going to be very potent against decks like Anel and other like relatively controlling decks like that kind of gives this deck a huge boon, I think, that I want to at least explore preparing for these upcoming match tournaments.
Yeah, and Russell kind of said the same thing where he feels like Purple can be pretty explored right now. Where Purple really only existed as Red Purple Law, and it was, you know, kind of leaning on the red part and the non-existent blue part for its removal. But yeah, he said the same thing with a lot of it, and like Douglas Bullis is really good. If we're not afraid of Red Purple Law just zooming you to 0 as much, we can be greedier with a lot of our setup and plays too, and especially like Purple Luffy can be one of the greediest decks because you have to go you know, to really low hand sizes and stuff. So the only thing I would say about this deck that I've noticed is that if blue's around, blue is still a really tough matchup. Where one, you tend to have like 8-9 cards early if you use your leader effect a lot, so Pudding can just like wipe all that away, which feels really bad. And it can get around Magellan, and since most of your stuff outside of the Kaido is, you know, 6 costs and less, Gravity Blade is really great at just resetting the board, or getting rid of blockers and that kind of stuff. But I do agree that I think purple has some chance to try out some funnier things. I've also thought about Foxy. Shoutouts to our Foxy player who was on stream at Pasadena's last week. But yeah, I think this is nice that like you can also just like ulti page one more often and not be worried that it's going to get immediately answered, or your opponent's going to get the same value the next turn for less resources.
100%. Getting Suru stage Lucci on my ulti page one never felt good.
No, it is awful. So cool. I think this is a fun deck, and it's I've already been wrong about how good this deck was and the potential for it in OP07 vanilla, which shout outs to Brian for topping with the deck in the last couple weeks, and then so I think that means that it definitely has some more room, especially because I think Red Purple Law was a really tough matchup for the deck.
I would agree, but yeah, I'm definitely going to be trying this deck out a lot more, and hopefully it has some legs. But if Boa ends up being too terrifying a matchup, I might have to retire it for a while.
Yeah. Do you think extending to it? Do you think Red Purple Luffy has some more chance? I think Law was a really tough matchup for that one as well. Or your thoughts?
I do think that deck naturally has a problem against Bonney. Just like the fact that all it really does is try to create a couple large swings, just kind of naturally gets neutered, making your opponent just rest one of them. And I'm also not entirely sure if it's a Nell matchup is going to be particularly spectacular, just because of like they always still have Kingdom Come, and the leader ability is kind of also basically like a pseudo Bonney effect in a weird kind of abstract way.
Yeah, it's funny because Luffy, the Luffy name's supposed to counter a Nell, but 10-drop Luffy gets hard countered by a Nell in general, which is kind of weird for that one. But I think that one that has some potential for people looking into it. I've seen people try to make builds without the 10 cost. I know like the 8 cost Dragon's actually really good for the deck too, for that kind of stuff. But cool. All right, there's Purple Luffy. Let's go to the next one. We've got Katakuri, and I know people are going to ask this already, so I'm going to ask you first. Do you think Katakuri is better than a Nell? Why are we talking about Katakuri instead of a Nell right now, I guess?
Yeah, so I think Kata's aggressive component was basically impossible to exploit when your opponent was playing RP Law. Like trying to rely on Kikonojos, Parasparrows, all that kind of stuff was like basically impossible when RP Law was running rampant in our meta and Japan. Additionally, I think 10 Mom wasn't really as reliable of a threat when Stage existed, because just one Tempest Cake alongside a Stage just made sure that your 10 Moms basically never survived. But I do think that this kind of build does help a little bit more against decks like Bonney and decks like Nami, because you can just rely on your 10 Moms with a deck like this against Nami and just like not really attack near the late game and just make your opponent trash a life, which is a weird thing to do against Nami. But when you kind of deny Nami the ability to use its events and just still kind of proactively get rid of their life, it's really hard for that deck to kind of get any traction and kind of churn through its deck, which is like super beneficial from your perspective. Additionally, I think the large size characters can be pretty potent against Bonney. I do think that like 8-cost Kid might be a problem, and if Bonney ends up being super popular, you might want to end up playing cards like 8-cost Katakuri or stuff like that to kind of help in those games. But this deck kind of gets to play 6-cost Pero and 7-cost Mom as just like relatively large like attacking characters against Black Yellow Luffy as well. So all in all, I think a lot of this stuff gives you a little bit more aggressive leading stuff against the rest of the field, but you also get to play a fair amount of big characters with a lot of power level against like these other like slower decks that are going to be the boogeymans of the format.
Yeah, and I definitely agree on that. And like as mentioned, like Onami getting banished, I think is impactful for something like when people look at this, I think their biggest thing is like, oh, what's your answer for Blue Nami, where they will never hit you, you'll never get any of your trigger effects. 7-cost Linlin, you literally can't play it unless it's just for tempo, because they'll just always give you the life, right? They don't care.
Yeah.
But I think as mentioned, like 10-drop Big Mom will win you that matchup, especially if you just like stop attacking them and then you just play these one after the other, they really can't proactively get like their effects off, and then the 12K is huge, and being able to trash any potential triggers, I think, is really, really big.
Yep, I agree with that. Also, I think that like Flampe does help a reasonable amount in matchups that are going to be starving you a ton. Flampe being searchable for the first time in this deck was a very surprising niche effect, but still quite useful.
Yeah.
I also think that as a side note, Tukas Shirahoshi is actually kind of potent in this meta. Sure, it's like rested against Bonney and doing a bunch of stuff like that, but the blocker doesn't get bottom decked. That's basically what the large result is. And I think that can buy you a ton of time against specifically Black Yellow Luffy. And it also gives you a lot more defensive options later in the game, and your opponent's not really going to want to kill it. So this is going to be a unremovable blocker in a lot of games.
Yeah. Blue can bottom deck it, of course, but that just depends on that being around. But I agree. Yeah, Shirahoshi, I feel like it's a little bit more value when it can't just get leader effect by law for free, right? Because that awfully just feels awful. So in most of the case now, it just says, it's like a really mini Borsalino, because your opponent doesn't want to KO it with effects, so it's the same as like it having protection from KO effects, which is very valuable too.
Yep.
So
but yeah, that's the main thing that I wanted to explore a little bit more with this, and hopefully this format kind of lends itself to something like Katakuri. But I do think it might have a little too much trouble against BY. Even though I think having a bunch of big characters is nice, I do think that the 9K leader, and this deck doesn't have a great ways to deal with a 5-cost Sabo, might end up being a little bit too terrifying. But it's worth exploring at the very least. So I'm really happy to just try things out.
Would you consider maybe Compote instead of Paraspero, the 7/9? It's also a big Mom Pirate.
I do think that might be nice. The problem is that there's too much overlap with 7-Mom, and I think you might need 7-Mom in a lot of other matchups like Blue Dofi and other stuff like that, where the on-play is very relevant. But the Compote, the 9K body, will be super useful in matchups like that. And if that ends up being, if Black Yellow Luffy ends up being a lot more of a problem than these other like rogue decks, then yeah, I probably would end up leaning towards more the vanilla, and then probably play more 8-cost categories as well.
Sure. And this kind of goes to the beginning of the segment too. So you definitely think Anel is good, but there's not much that you think we change from builds you've published previously, right?
Not particularly. There's some cards get a little bit more significant.
Like I think
like 5-cost Sabo, Shirahoshi, like we talked about as well. Those cards just become a lot more useful and versatile in a lot of these matchups, which is super useful. And I think that Anel might be able to take a bigger approach, playing a lot more vanillas, playing a lot more of a grindy game, just because a lot of these decks just don't really have the resources to KO like back-to-back aces as frequently, basically.
Yeah, I would almost, if not permanently, at least test with Compote and Anel, though. I think that it definitely has more of a spot in that one. So, cool. All right, cool. Appreciate your insights on that. We'll see if Katakuri. I've played a couple already. I didn't miss the deck being around, but because sometimes they get the good curve and win. But we'll see if that is relevant in this meta too. And then lastly, we've got Gecko Moria, and Russell, in his mind, he thinks that if you're going to play black in this meta, Moria is just going to be more popular than Lucci at this point, just because I think the only thing that Lucci had was more consistent cost reduction and removal. And when you remove that from the equation, Moria's tempo might just be better, and the potential to see Moria more often, right? So especially since like in the mirror match, like Lucci can't just stage leader effect and like Helmeppo or something to get rid of the Moria is easy. But why do you bring Moria of all the lists?
Yeah, so even though a lot of people have been doing well with Moria, I think it won a regional in Europe a couple weeks ago.
Yep.
I know Fee Nguyen and Pasadena went undefeated in Swiss with it. This deck is like relatively consistent, very powerful, but it did have a couple glaring flaws. One of which just being that I just really did not like playing against Lucci.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I think stage kind of single-handedly made Lucci kind of very easy, or made it really easy for Lucci to just KO all of your
Yeah,
characters
it
before
did.
you even had time to deploy a Sabo. And I do think that like the lack of stage makes things a lot more like manageable from Moria's side. But I'm not entirely sure if that matchup's still going to be as like free or as easy as everyone thinks it's going to be now that stage is gone. Um, but I do think that Moria has a better matchup spread, and it's going to be a lot more powerful against the rest of what I expect the metagame to be. I do think that Moria is slightly better than Lucci would be against Black Yellow Luffy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Peronas and the Ishos are going to be very, very annoying for Black Yellow Luffy to deal with in the matchup. Um, I think that against Bonney, a bunch of the discard is going to be similarly powerful, and also against Nami, Ishos and Peronas are obviously going to be one of your best friends, alongside all these like swarming 5k bodies. So against like the decks that I'm worried about, being like the most popular contenders, I do think Moria is going to be a very, very powerful asset. Um, I am worried about the Reiju matchup. That's going to be a pretty
Mm-hmm.
annoying concern, especially with Vinsmoke Judge kind of swarming the board, since this deck only really is great at KOing one body a turn.
Yeah.
Um,
And usually
but
it's like 4 costs are kind of like where it gets to, and then unless you find your Ice Age, like anything higher than that's a little cumbersome.
Yeah, it is very annoying to kill or KO something like an Ichiji or a
Mm-hmm.
Judge with a deck like this.
Yeah, yeah.
But I do think this deck kind of has a lot of decent matchups nowadays, and I didn't really like the RP Law matchup with this deck before, and now that it's gone, I think there's a lot of things you can do now to kind of like help a little bit more in other matchups. But I think this deck is kind of, I get to play a bunch of decent black cards, and I get to be kind of decent against everything. And I think it attracts a lot of very good players because there's almost no like unplayably bad games when you're playing Moria.
Sure.
Aside from a situation where you keep like a Sindri hand and you just find no filler bark cards, you can always like do something reasonably proactive, and you usually find your Morias on curve. You can find your Ishos in a fair amount of games, and you can kind of just like play with your cards in that capacity that way. So I know it attracts a lot of like really, really good players in OP06. I think the players like Chris Sock,
Mm-hmm.
like AJ Bosio. There's a bunch of other people that have been playing this deck for a very long time. And now that it's gotten a huge power boost relative to the rest of the format, I think a lot of players will be attracted to something like this moving forward.
For sure. And I think like, you know, like the deck builds for these are moderately understood. I think Brook is moderately a staple. Some people play without it. And like usually the Navy slant for being able to fill our trash a little bit better. Like 4 Borsos feel really great when Red Purple Law is not around because they can't remove that for free. And again, like I think the other thing is that like sure Borsalino and like Sabo can get removed, but it takes up their entire turn to do so, right? Which with Gravity Blade. So if they don't have anything established already, it feels great. But yeah, I think that's good. I really like Isho in Moria in the sense that it's another 8/9, but just the fact that the cost reduction is really impactful for the deck to be able to make some plays sometime. Get rid of a 5 cost with the Isho and Absalom is really nice. And yeah, I think I agree. I'm unsure. I am a little bit worried that we're overstating how much Enos Lobby being gone affects Lucci as a deck in general. I think it's still going to be pretty present, but I don't know. I was also I think a little bit wrong on Gecko Morio super misses Great Eruption. That is a card that it misses, I think, a lot more than I thought it would.
Yep. It's weird how the black ban lists at this point are just cards that just got those really small reductions, like Sakazuki Leader, Great Eruption, Ennis Lobby now. I think people kind of like drastically underrate how powerful those convenient like -1s are in a lot of games.
Yeah.
And I do think this Lucci's ability naturally is going to be a lot more powerful than people let on. And I do think the leader is going to be quite decent regardless. It might still be just a better deck than Moria in a large majority of situations, to be completely candid with you. I'm just not entirely sure if that deck is going to be materially different than like decks that have already existed that cut stage and played ice stage instead.
Sure.
Which is kind of reason why I didn't want to like explore it too much for something like this.
Yeah. Well, maybe a good question to kind of end this segment and this question. So I'm gonna pull them all up. What do you think is potentially like one of the? Do you think Moria is the best black leader? Do you think some other ones can maybe be in contention right now? I have all on the screen right now. We're not counting Luffy because it's its own little thing. But I talked to Russell about it. We think like Perona has some better chance because the matchup into Lucci, if they have stage, is just horrendous. They just get to remove your board. Like they answer yours very easily. I know you're a big fan of Smoker, so is it his time to shine potentially? And unironically, this leader sucks, but blue and black is really good potentially in this meta, and being able to play Pudding and Gecko Moria in the same deck is pretty good still. And this deck has a searcher for Moria off the 1-drop Sengoku.
I do think the Sakazuki leader is probably a little too bad to play.
Okay.
I think I'd probably somehow lean towards Rebecca over Sakazuki.
Gotcha.
But I do think the best black leaders in order kind of hasn't really changed since pre-banning. I think Lucci's still the best one, followed by Moria, followed by Perona. I do think the old leaders have kind of gotten a little too power crept in this format. I think Smoker is just like a little too slow until the starter deck that comes out in a couple months is available. And I know that card it's not even out now. I'm not even beyond.
No, I got it. Don't worry. We work very hard here at Egman events. Yeah, so cards like the Hina, right?
4-cost Hina, and then like the 5-cost Tashigi, I think helped this deck a ton. But I'm not entirely sure if the deck's even going to be playable then. But even as it is right now, I think without those cards, it's going to be a little bit too painful. But I do think that Lucci's probably the best black deck we can bring to this format. It just needs probably a little bit more fine tuning. I think a really important thing for people to prepare for Nats is that a lot of people's decks will not be as refined and tuned because the metagame isn't as resolved. And when that's the case, playing a 4-life leader is a very dangerous proposition.
Sure.
Because you have a lot less room for error. If you end up playing a Perona deck and then your opponent is going to be in like Zoro or something, and you built your deck to play against a different matchup, you might just be too terrified to even play that matchup. And I think that's probably the thing that people probably need to consider for their deck building in this current meta. And I'd probably lean a lot more towards these 5-life leaders like Lucci and Moria. And if you think you have a grasp on it, like after like Liverpool Nationals or stuff like that, then I might lean towards something like Perona. But as it is right now, I think the 5-life leaders are both a safer bet and probably a little bit more consistent.
Yeah, I think that's pretty good insight. And I also think that this is going to be a weird time because by and large, when we play this card game, we moderately know what the format looks like, and we moderately know like maybe not like the best builds, but like generically what decks look like right now. And even though it's just like it's literally 2 cards. 2 cards got hit. One's a leader, right? So that's kind of impactful. But like 2 cards got hit, and we have this super different we have this different format, and the stakes are incredibly high. Like the highest we can get for this card game with this restriction list. So it's going to be interesting to see how much people are coveting their spice. If there's going to be like people like trying to be like, oh, this is rightfully so, trying to hide their deck list, their attacks, and that kind of stuff. And we generally don't have this kind of spice rush where people think they know what the meta is. They're keeping it to themselves because they need that competitive advantage. And it's going to be really interesting kind of how just it all shakes out at the end.
Yep, 100%. As to be completely fair for everyone testing, there is some weird like I call it inbreeding that happens sometimes in your own testing group.
Sure.
Where if you just test with the same people over and over again, you kind of get this weird, distorted, like perverse version of the meta that you guys might have, and that might not be what you expect at Nats. So even like testing with other people that you've kind of played at in the regionals in the past, is like reaching out to them and just brainstorming with other people might just be enough. You don't have to tell everyone your secrets, but definitely keep involved with the community, kind of keep up with a lot of what people are testing with, just so that you can get a better understanding of this meta. Because as a heads up, if your conclusion is probably Uta is the best deck to bring to Nats, no offense, it's probably not the.
As someone
the
who's fallen down
reach.
that path before, right, Jonas?
Yeah, a few too many times.
So I think that's fair, and I don't know. I don't really have I don't play in tournaments routinely, so my deck build is almost build the best deck for me, right? And that's usually whenever I do it. So, but yeah, there could be some echo chambers, but if it's the right echo, you can find a lot of success. So. But yeah, it's just something that this card game generally doesn't have to deal with, and I'm curious to see what the next couple weeks of that's going to look like for potential spice or what people think is the meta breaker for now that just red purple law is gone. So
it is going to be a frustrating next couple weeks where
Yes.
these next regionals are just going to be what's already existed. And I mean, I'm probably still going to play RP Law because there's not really much time or much reason to dedicate towards that old format now and just probably just play what I was playing before. But I really am eager just to see a lot of people topping with like other spicy decks, and the fact that I don't get that option is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah, I as someone who does these tournament reports and stuff, it's going to be definitely less. I'll have less motivation even just to be like, all right, here's a video for a format that we get for one more week, and you probably already know what deck you're playing, but. Otherwise, the next couple of weeks I'm going crazy, and it should be a good time. So
testing at home is going to be a blast. The regionals are going to be relatively lackluster. But even still, I'll probably be playing games of the new format on the side. Just for fun.
Yeah, I think, and that's just kind of how it happens when there's overlap like this. But it's, I don't think it's like super negative. Just kind of a weird couple of days. So.
Yeah, 100% better than a few months.
Yes, better. Again, I think most people, if asked, they would rather. What OP08 is like OP08 legal proper. So like the week after Wave 1, they probably would have wanted like something that they're restrictionless. But I was definitely in the they're going to make us play Red Purple Law for 3 months mindset. So the fact that we get OP08 without the Red Purple Law, I think is really great. I think that's the right call at the end of the day.
Deck building is going to be a blast. It's my favorite part about card games in general, and now we get both 2 brand new formats that are relatively untouched, just for us to kind of have fun around with. So looking forward.
It's my favorite thing, and traditionally it's one of the least impactful things for One Piece, unfortunately, compared to play style and that kind of stuff. So being able to flex that muscle is I'm really, really excited. So
same here.
Cool. Well, I told you we've got like 60 minutes. We're at like 55 with all things considered. So this whole video is like 2 hours. So if you're watching this, you're the real MVP. I appreciate you making it this far. But anything from you, Yonas, before we shut it down?
Nothing aside from I wish everyone the best of luck testing for these upcoming nationals. It's going to be a super fun time. Just talking about a bunch of different decks. And yeah, I hope everyone has some fun things to bring to these upcoming regionals.
Yeah, and you'll be at Peoria and Dallas in August, and then are you going to Liverpool?
I will be. I got into Liverpool.
Oh, nice!
So
Congrats.
I'll be traveling nonstop, and it should be a fun time.
Yeah. So you've got honestly like 4 large events with 2 different formats for the next 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Cool.
Busy time on the road, but
as your eyes just kind of glaze over and that the realization hits you. Well, thank you very much, Jonas, for taking some time. I know it's a valuable resource right now. Good luck on your travels. Thank you guys for watching this video. I hope it was insightful and you guys got something from it. It's a little bit everywhere. I know everyone has their own thoughts on this meta, but I hope you guys at least appreciate ours. So that's going to be it for us. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll catch you all next time.